Just a few days back, the former flagship of the Indian Navy, our first aircraft carrier, the legendary INS Vikrant, was hauled to a breaking yard where she's being ripped apart and reduced to scrap. Halfway across the world, in the UK, the distinguished flying cross of the man considered the father of the Indian Air Force is up for auction. The government of India doesn't bid. What's the link, you ask? Well, consider this. Do we as a nation pay lip service to the memory of our war vets and symbols of our military past? But before we get into our debate this evening, here's a study in contrast on how war vets and the military past are respected in the United Kingdom. Rahul Joglekar reports.
Jambu Majumdar was called the father of the Indian Air Force. His heroism in Burma and Europe won him 2 Distinguished Flying Cross medals, the first Indian to be given this award. 70 years after his death, here they are in England, up for auction. Why?
I wanted them in the hands of a serious collector who would value them, rather than just leaving them in the house. No, if they'd been left in my house and when I die, I think people would have come and claimed them or fought amongst themselves for it, maybe.
Do you think the Indian government should be bidding for an item like this?
I wish they had bid for it, but they didn't. So I don't know the reason why.
In contrast to India's attitude to preserving its wartime history, the UK celebrates and displays it. Look at the HMS Belfast, a decommissioned ship now a museum in the middle of London. Or Trafalgar Square, named after the Battle of Trafalgar. Politicians or thinkers aren't immortalized in stone here. It's military men in uniform who put their lives on the line for the country. All across London, you'd see many structures and constructions that commemorate and celebrate this country's participation in war and peace across the world and across the centuries. Just a short distance away is the Imperial War Museum, a museum that has painstakingly collated the names of soldiers who died during both world wars. Many of them are Indian names. Recently, Sikh historians held an exhibition to raise awareness about Indian soldiers who fought in World War I. 1 in 6 men who fought the war were Indian. One of them, Hardeep Singh Malik, the first Indian ever to fly in the Air Force. Historians believe these stories have been forgotten in both countries.
After independence, the British themselves have forgotten about the effort of the British Indian Army and of India in general in helping the war contribution. But then secondly, the issues, I think, in India itself, the independence movement and the way that those who fought for the British are viewed. There's almost an embarrassment that these men fought for the British.
Can India do more to protect and celebrate its imperial military history? Also, is the medal priced at £20,000 or roughly 20 lakh rupees really worth it? For now, the highest bid in the auction was £15,500 and it remains unsold. With Vishnu Som in Delhi, Rahul Joglekar in London for NDTV.
Well, joining us now, his first interview, a proper interview for television, is Shailin Majumdar, the son of Wing Commander K.K. Majumdar, the person who actually decided to auction his father's Distinguished Flying Cross and other medals. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Sir, if the Indian Air Force were to raise money, or if somebody else for that matter were to raise money, would you now be willing to give these medals to the Indian Air Force since that auction bid of yours has failed? Shouldn't these be displayed in India?
The money is not an issue at this stage, and I'm just going to keep the ownership of these medals. The fact is that if I hadn't found these medals, no one was aware that they were actually in existence. When my father died, everyone knew he had a DFC in Bar, and I was only 2 years old. He died on my 2nd birthday, and when subsequently I asked the question as to where are these DFC medals, etc., no one gave me an answer. And many years later, when I grew up, I finally found them. And if I hadn't found them, the Air Force wouldn't have been aware of their existence. No one would have raised the question. My father, as you know, was well known and known to the whole world as being a war hero and and the fact is that.
But Mr. Majumdar, let me ask you this. If money is not an issue for you, as you say, then why don't you just give it back to India now? Or why don't you give to return it to the Indian Air Force? They can put it in a big museum. It is a treasure.
No, he was well known, and if I hadn't found these medals and had it publicized via yourselves and NDTV, etc., no one would have. His history.
So his history is not forgotten to the Indian Air Force at all, but you've publicized it now. So, and you've gone on record, and you've said just now that there was no financial compulsion. So why don't you hand it over to the Indian Air Force? It will be placed in a museum over here. It will be seen by thousands of people.
Well, hopefully one day, if the Indian Air Force regard these as being precious, they might want to actually part with some money for it. But my view, and I've had expert opinion from various people who deal with various Air Force museums, and the curator of some of these museums has actually said that our experience is that these DFCs and medals that are donated, they just gather dust and no one comes to view them. In my view, a private collector who has paid serious money for these would treasure them
but sir,
much more in a way.
If the Indian Air Force were to guarantee that they would look after these medals, your father is a legend in the Indian Air Force. He's considered the father of the Indian Air Force. People know him over here in the Indian Air Force. Generations of IAF officers have been taught about him. If the Indian Air Force is willing to look after your medals, would you be willing to give it to India? Because this is a treasure in a country, and it's a pity it's not been discovered earlier. But now that you have discovered it and there is so much interest, will you let India have it?
I would have to consider that in due course, but right now I want to retain them in my own ownership and possession.
But so, in other words, you are not ruling out giving it to the Indian Air Force?
I'm not ruling out anything right now. That's correct.
Well, that's an important statement over there, Mr. Majumdar. Thank you very much for speaking to us. The bid didn't go through. You couldn't actually auction off that treasure. You have possession of it at this stage. The question is, will it ultimately come back to India where it should be respected? But do we really care about our war veterans, our symbols of our past military glory? That's the question that we're looking at this evening. And joining us now to debate this, Air Marshal Anil Chopra, someone who looks at this issue very, very closely. An ace fighter pilot himself in his day. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us. We are also looking at the case of the INS Vikrant, the flagship, the former flagship of the Indian Navy. It's now being turned into scrap. That's a disgrace. Kiran Paigankar, the convener of the Save Vikrant committee, tried his best but was unable to actually save that ship. He joins us as well. Aman Sinha, spokesperson of the BJP, and C.R. Keshavan, spokesperson of the Congress, all with us. Air Marshal Chopra, you know, it's unusual, but it appears, and you heard that interview, that the son of Wing Commander Jambu Majumdar now says that if the Air Force were to offer him, if the Air Force were to approach him, if the Air Force were to give a little bit of money, then he'd consider giving it back to India. Is it time that the Indian Air Force, the government of India, somebody actually said, here's the money, it's a small amount, it's actually about 20 lakh rupees, please can we have these treasures back? You think it's time to do that, Air Marshal?
Yeah, Vishnu, having commanded the same squadron which Jambu Majumdar commanded, for me, personally, it is a rather sad day that, these medals are being thought to be auctioned. Now, we all know Jambu was a legend and he was the father of the Indian Air Force. And Marshal of Indian Air Force Arjun Singh, who was a youngster when Majumdar was commanding, he tells us that he has never seen a better flyer than him. Now, there are two issues. First is, there is no doubt about the legend part. DFC is a big award. In today's time, I would think that DFC is equivalent to Mahavir Chakra, if not a Paramveer Chakra. He was the first DFC awardee. He is the only one in India to have had 2 DFCs. Now, I think from the family's point of view, both Bambi and Anjali. I think, it's a proud thing for them to be children of a legend. If I was in their place, even if I was to be bankrupt and go hungry, I would never sell or auction these legendary things and give it to the Air Force.
Okay.
And I must mention here,
yes,
that Bambi was very kind to have given a chance to the Chief of Air Staff to speak to him.
yes.
And the Chief of Air Staff urged him that kindly give us these medals so that they can be a treasure in our museum.
So the point now is that auction has failed and the government of India has a policy saying that they will not bid at auctions. But Aman Sinha, let me ask you this, the larger issue. While there does seem to be a chance to bring back this treasure, there is no more auction that is happening. In the first instance, don't you think that the government should have gone and bid for this? What is 20,000 to 30,000 pounds for something, for a treasure of a man considered the father of the Indian Air Force? Shouldn't we have bid? Shouldn't India have bid at this auction?
No, Vishnu, as the previous panelist was telling us, the Chief of the Indian Air Force personally requested to the son of Mr.
It was
Jumbo
too late
Majumdar
by then. It had been put into the auction house.
Bring
a
this
contract
medals
had been
back
signed.
to India.
That being the case, shouldn't India have bid for it at the auction?
Vishnu. The government of India has a policy. The government of India has a policy, as we all know, not to bid for expensive items at an auction. And therefore, we request, the son of Mr. Jumbo Majumdar, who was a heroic and a legendary pilot of the Indian Air Force, to to provide us with these medals back to the Indian Air Force, where they rightfully belong. And it is unfortunate that he's put it up for auction. And Indian Air Force will, I'm sure they will keep trying to get these medals back. And I'm sure they are, talking to son of Mr. Jumbo Majumdar, and let us hope that things will work out. But as far as the stated government policy is there, we are all aware that there is a government policy not to bid for expensive items at any auction, and
so
Air Force will
just
consider the
point,
matter
sir.
appropriately.
C.R. Keshavan, now this was a policy which existed at the time of the UPA, but there have been instances when bidding has actually taken place. For example, in the case of Gandhiji, the Kalambak letters, it wasn't part of a bid process, but just as a bid was supposed to take place, those archives and those letters which had been exchanged between Gandhiji and his friend, the government of India proactively moved in, they spent millions of dollars and they actually got them back. In this instance, should the government actually pay? It's no longer an auction. Should someone actually say, here's the money, please bring this back?
3 points, Vishnu. First thing is, see, I'll even take you back a little back. In 2008 and 9, when certain belongings of Gandhiji were put on auction, the UPA government had gone to the courts and said the auction shouldn't take place. And you remember a famous industrialist from Bangalore bought it. But since we had said the auction shouldn't take place, we couldn't go for auction. But the second time around, you're right. In 2011, the UPA government paid 700,000 pounds to retrieve the correspondence of Gandhiji. See, these people, these great heroes and patriots and their personal belongings are an intrinsic part of our heritage and history, and rightfully belong to the nation and our people. And I don't want to play politics here, but I just want to say one thing. See, I read this. After the NDTV had given the story, the Indian Air Force had gotten in touch with the Air Attaché in the Indian High Commission.
Yes.
All that the government had to do was, if not, go in for the auction, like what we did with the Kalambak papers. We spoke to the auction house, we spoke to the family, and we sorted it out. And they could have done the same here. And I think one interesting point, Vishnu. Recently, the Prime
that
Minister
has already been done.
When he met Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister.
Please, you need not preach us about that. That is something which has already been done. We have spoken to the family.
No, please
we
let
have
me complete.
spoken to the auction house.
Kindly
and
be civil.
no less a person than Chief of Indian Air Force.
Let me complete my point. See, he gave the
No, it's not a question of civil.
Mr.
Don't
Sinha,
state
why
incorrect
have
facts.
Some civility when
you are being
speak.
uncivil by saying so.
No, it is civility. Don't be defensive. Don't be defensive.
Please, I do not need any lessons in civility
Mr.
from
Vishnu,
you.
The Prime Minister gave Mansingh Trophy.
Please
all right, Aman, let him finish his point. Aman, let him finish his point.
You are saying he is not playing politics.
See,
he is taking a high moral ground. He is not playing politics, but he is playing politics with symbols of our.
These people don't let you speak.
It is unfortunate the attitude of our.
All right, Mr. Keshwan,
one of the reasons.
I take the point you are mentioning. Aman, just a moment, Mr. Keshwan.
Vishnu,
yes.
Vishnu, the Prime Minister went to the. Let me complete, please. The Prime Minister gave the Mansingh Trophy, which is a great symbol of the Sikh battalion. You know, for all the great heroes who fought in the First World War.
He gave it to the Australian Prime Minister.
The Australian Prime Minister. What is 20,000 to 30,000 pounds for this government? Why can't you give 30,000 pounds and retrieve the great, history and this relics of these great heroes?
Okay, I want to go across. I take your point, Kiran Paigankar. I want to now focus on something else. I want to also focus on a common thread about whether we pay just lip service to protecting or remembering our symbols of our military past. Kiran, you have worked very hard, unsuccessfully, unfortunately, in saving the INS Vikrant. You would be a very disappointed man today. Why did it ultimately fall through? Is it ultimately because people just didn't care? That you found yourself fighting a system that didn't care? It's just a ship, it's old, throw it away into the dustbin of history, let it be scrap. Was that basically the attitude?
Well, I think there are a couple of points which I would like to touch on. A, we have a political apathy on preserving such kind of monuments, and two, we are not much literate about preserving our history. Like compared to Vikrant, there is a 73-year-old history on the ship. Lot of activities has been done, lot of patriotic movements has been done, people have taken the inspiration, and majorly we failed in creating that saga into a national monument. Most of the countries, they have their naval maritime museum. We don't have. We forgotten one thing, Vikrant always had the love and care from all type of people all across the world, and particularly in India. We never had this kind of a respect even to Virat and the so forthcoming warships or the flight carriers. So I think this political apathy as well as the historical interpretation has failed us.
The historical interpretation has failed us. Amar, let me ask you this. This is a government that has, and the Prime Minister, I remember during the election campaign, Mr. Modi had said that he wants to reach out to the armed forces. Arun Jaitley had said some time back that there must be a structured history of the Indian armed forces. You have said that there needs to be a museum and so many other things. One rank, one pay, but that's not unrelated to this specific issue. Do you really think that despite what the BJP has said, even more needs to be done?
Vishnu, you are right. The government has accorded top priority to our defense personnel, and we respect our symbols, our pride and heritage, glorious heritage of our Indian defense forces, and therefore there are a lot of memorials and other things which are there on the government's agenda. However, as far as INS Vikrant was concerned, the expert body, the Indian Navy, the Cochin shipyard, they had all opined that it is a 73-year-old ship which has eroded, and it is impossible to save it by any means whatsoever. And in fact, moving it around could have led to perhaps ship giving
sinking,
away,
yes.
and pieces falling off, and that would have resulted into another environmental hazard. So therefore, and I think this was examined, all these questions were examined in detail by the High Court and Supreme Court, and after going through the whole process, this was sought to be taken out in this manner. And it is, yes, indeed it's we also take it with a pinch of sadness. We did not want this. The government made also attempts and efforts. However, it was too late in the day. The UPA government perhaps did nothing at all for past 2-3 years in order to restore it, and that was one of the reasons that the INS Vikrant was in a state of no return, and we had to give up on that.
Okay, we are running out of time. Air Marshal Chopra, you had one last comment to make. I just want to go back to Jumbo Majumdar, sir, because this is something that we can save. In this program, he told us that look, if the Indian Air Force is serious, if they are willing to partake of some amount of money, he'll give it back. Surely, sir, it's time that somebody did that. Air Marshal, do you think it's time?
Yeah. Vishnu, as a nation, I think we lack a sense of history. And the amounts that we are talking of are so small. 60 crores for a Vikrant, which is size of a city. This is no amount. And when we come to the medals of Jumbo Majumdar, it is 20 lakhs. You know, I, as a retired person, from my own personal pension funds, I am ready to pay 20 lakhs because that is the kind of small amount it is. And I am telling you on prime time television today that in case nobody pays this 20 lakhs, I, Air Marshal who commanded the same squadron, will pay 20 lakhs and get these medals from Bambi Majumdar.
I think we need to end this program on that note. And that, I think, summarizes this. Here is a soldier who served in that squadron, a fighter pilot who has spent his entire career understanding what it is to respect an older generation, because that's what the Forge is based on. It's based on a sense of tradition. He's a retired man. I've not had any discussion with him prior to this program. And here he says, from his own savings, he's going to pull out 20 lakhs and he's willing to give it so that these treasures come back. Does a retired soldier, an Air Marshal, need to do that? Shouldn't the government have done it? Shouldn't the Indian Air Force have done it? I think we'll end the program on this note. Thank you very much for being with us.